She was just an extra, poor, unnoticed, and desperate to feed her family. He was a billionaire, jilted at the altar and clinging to pride. One accidental yes at the wrong wedding turned Emma's life upside down. But what started as a cruel mistake slowly unraveled into something raw, real, and unforgettable. Secrets, betrayals, love born from chaos. This is not your typical fairy tale. Who really was meant to marry him? And why did he choose her in the end? Where are you watching from? If this story has you hooked, hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss what's next. Emma Carter stood frozen in the cramped hallway of her apartment, her cheap flip phone pressed against her ear. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, smooth, confident, and full of promises that felt too big for her little world. Hello, Mrs. Carter. Yes, this is Mr. Langley. I represent a private production company. We'd like to hire you for a very special one-day gig. It pays $25,000, and all you have to do is follow instructions. Her breath caught 25,000. That was more than she made in 6 months bouncing from one background role to another. She glanced over her shoulder. Her dad was on the couch again, an oxygen tank hissing softly by his side. Her little brother was doing his homework on the floor, surrounded by school books held together with duct tape. Her sister was in the kitchenette, frying eggs with the last bit of oil they had left. Emma's throat tightened. Where and when? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Be at the Seraphim Salon downtown in 1 hour, the man replied. Use your real name, Emma Carter. A car will be waiting. She didn't hesitate. She scribbled a quick note for her sister, grabbed her worn backpack, and bolted down the stairs. The cab she flagged reeked of stale fries and cheap cologne, but she didn't care. She counted every red light like it was time slipping through her fingers. When they pulled up to the salon, she paid in crumpled bills and slid out with a mumbled, "Thank you, sir," before turning to face the sleek glass building in front of her. It gleamed like something out of a dream, mirrored panels, soft golden lighting, a scent of expensive shampoo wafting through the automatic doors. Inside, the receptionist barely looked up when Emma approached. I'm Emma Carter, she said nervously. A woman in all black appeared instantly, clipboard in hand. Right this way, Miss Carter. They whisked her into a private room before she could ask a single question. Her old clothes were taken, a soft robe handed to her. Then came the shampoo, the bath, the lotions. Her skin was exfoliated, her nails painted, her hair curled into elegant waves she barely recognized in the mirror. The makeup was flawless, too flawless. Excuse me, she murmured once. What exactly is this for? A commercial? A film? A stylist smiled, but didn't answer. Another handed her a box. Inside was a wedding gown, so beautiful it made her breath hitch. Lace, silk, hand-beaded details. This must be a mistake, she whispered. But no one acted like it was. They zipped her in, adjusted the veil, handed her a bouquet of white roses. Her phone buzzed in the corner, but she ignored it. Everything felt surreal, like she was being swept up in a role too big for her. She overheard 2 nail techs whispering nearby. They say she's marrying Landon Reyes? One giggled. You think it's really her? She's so normal. Emma's stomach flipped. She told herself it was all part of the act. Maybe it was some avant-garde project. A hidden camera setup. A stunt for social media. Whatever it was, she needed the money. She needed it desperately. When a man in a dark suit opened the door and gestured, she rose to her feet. The red carpet unfurled ahead of her like a path into another life. The bridal car was waiting outside, gleaming and white. People watched. Some clapped. Her heart pounded, but she forced a graceful smile, lifted her chin, and stepped into the car. Inside, she whispered to herself, "This has to be a shoot. Just act the part. Be convincing. They're probably watching you. Do it right, and maybe you'll finally get noticed." As the car pulled away, she dared to hope. Maybe this was the break she'd been waiting for. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't another cruel joke from the universe. She didn't know that her name, her face, and the role she's about to play would change her life forever. The car rolled to a stop in front of an opulent cathedral Emma had only seen in magazines, the kind of place where the rich got married while the rest of the world watched from the sidelines. A valet opened the door for her, as if she truly belonged there. The marble steps gleamed beneath the late afternoon sun, and two flower girls stood ready with baskets, giggling softly as they tossed petals in her path. Every instinct in Emma's body screamed, "This is not normal," but she reminded herself, it's just a gig. High budget. Big payoff. Smile and wave. She stepped out with practiced grace, gripping the bouquet like it was a lifeline. The gown swished as she walked, delicate lace catching the light. Everyone turned to look at her. For a moment, she felt like a real bride, not a struggling actress. Not the girl who skipped meals to pay for her father's meds, but someone elegant, someone chosen. Inside, the pews were filled, not with extras in mismatched outfits, but with well-dressed people, real guests, whispering and staring with genuine emotion in their eyes. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Emma's heels clicked against the polished floor as she was led down the aisle by a solemn-faced usher who didn't say a word. She kept scanning the crowd for familiar signs. A camera crew, a boom mic, a director in jeans barking orders. Nothing, just candlelight and curious glances. At the altar stood a man, tall, broad-shouldered, striking in a custom-tailored tux. His dark eyes locked onto her the moment she stepped through the double doors. He didn't smile. He looked nervous, not like an actor playing a groom, but like someone about to make a real-life commitment. The organ swelled behind her, and her heart raced. Emma kept walking, breath shallow, head spinning. Just act, get through it. She reached him and managed a small, practiced smile. "Hi," she whispered. "You look beautiful," he said quietly, his voice low, steady. "Thanks," she replied, thrown off by how sincere he sounded. "You too. Very. Groom. Like..." He blinked, puzzled. Before either of them could say more, the priest began the ceremony. Words floated around her like mist. "In sickness and in health, forsaking all others, do you take this man?" Emma hesitated. She turned slightly toward the man beside her, brow furrowed. "I'm sorry. Can I talk to you for a sec?" He nodded quickly and guided her a few steps to the side, shielding the conversation from the guests.
Are you okay?
I thought this was a gig, like an acting job, a fake wedding for a commercial or something. His expression froze. "A gig," he repeated slowly. "Yeah," she whispered. "The guy who called me said I'd be playing a bride. I'm an extra. Like in TV shows. I thought this was some kind of elaborate shoot." He stared at her, lips slightly parted. Then he rubbed a hand down his face. "Elena, who..." "Dear God," he muttered. "You're not her. You're not my fiancée." "I'm Emma. Emma Carter. I was told to use my real name." "I thought you were an actor, too." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Then the priest cleared his throat. The man looked at her, gaze unreadable. Just, go along with it, please. I'll explain later. Before she could protest, he led her back to the altar. Her mind spun with confusion, but she nodded when prompted, said I do when she was supposed to, and barely kept from passing out when the priest finally said, "You may kiss the bride." She blinked, startled, but before she could react, he lifted the veil and kissed her. It wasn't a peck. It wasn't staged. It was warm, sure, real. Her heart stuttered. Her eyes flew open. His were already watching her, unreadable but intense. And suddenly, she couldn't remember where she was, or why she was there. All she knew was that something very real had just happened, and she had no idea what to do next. Emma stumbled backward the moment their lips parted, her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and panic. Her hand flew to her mouth as she stared at the man she'd just accidentally kissed. Accidentally kissed in front of 100 strangers. Her first kiss, mind you. Not on a film set, not in rehearsal, but right there, at a real altar. The priest continued speaking, oblivious to the storm brewing behind Emma's forced smile. She couldn't feel her legs. Her brain was buzzing. She leaned in toward the groom, whispering from the corner of her mouth, that kiss wasn't in the script. He didn't blink. There is no script. Her lips parted, confusion flooding her. Before he could answer, the priest motioned them forward to the reception area, beside the chapel. A round of applause followed them, but all Emma could hear was her own heartbeat hammering in her ears. She was ushered toward a table where a silver cake stood tall, decorated with sugar roses and glittering edible pearls. A man handed her a knife and gestured for her to cut the cake alongside her husband. "Do I really have to do this?" she whispered under her breath, but the cameras were snapping and the guests were cheering, so she smiled through clenched teeth and sliced the cake with trembling hands. The groom, whose name she still didn't know, rested a firm but gentle hand on her waist as they posed together. His touch made her flinch. Next came the bouquet toss. Emma blinked at the sea of excited single women behind her. She raised the flowers, fake grin glued in place, and flung the bouquet over her shoulder with zero enthusiasm. As it landed, a cheer erupted. Emma turned to flee, but someone grabbed her arm. "Mrs. Rise," a hotel staff member said, bowing slightly. "This way. Please. Your suite is ready." "Suite?" she echoed. "Oh, no, no, no. No, not staying." "You're staying," her groom said, suddenly at her side again. "Please, Emma. Let's talk. In private." He pulled her gently but insistently through a hallway lined with gold sconces and velvet carpets, then into a private elevator that seemed to soar straight into the sky. She didn't say a word until they entered the suite. Massive white marble floors, towering windows, a four-poster bed that screamed honeymoon. "What the hell is going on?" she demanded, spinning to face him. "Who are you?" He shut the door softly behind them and turned to her, his jaw tense. "My name is Landon Rise." Emma's stomach dropped. That name, it was everywhere, in tech headlines, business magazines. Rise Technologies, the multi-billion-dollar empire. She gaped at him. "You're that Landon Rise?" He nodded. "I thought this was a commercial, or a scene for a movie, or a prank. I thought I was acting." Landon raked a hand through his hair, "and I thought I was marrying my fiancée." Emma backed away, her heels clicking across the floor. You mean this was a real wedding? Yes, yes. Oh my God, she muttered, dropping onto the nearest couch, head in her hands. I married a billionaire by accident. He paced the room. I didn't recognize the switcher because I've only recently regained my sight. Emma lifted her head slowly. Wait. What? I've never seen Elena, my actual fiancée, not with my own eyes. We were together during the years I couldn't see. She stared at him, mouth open. He continued, voice quieter now. I was told Elena would be at the salon. Everything was arranged. But instead, I got you. Emma swallowed hard. A man handed me an envelope full of money. Told me to say my real name and do my best. I thought it was acting. I didn't know I was walking into a real marriage. Landon stared at her for a long, heavy moment. Well, he said finally, congratulations, Emma Carter. You're now Mrs. Landon Rise. She let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. This can't be happening. I wish I were joking, he said, sitting across from her. But here we are. Emma's hands curled into fists. Okay, then I want out. I'll give the money back. Just annul it. Divorce me. Whatever rich people do. Landon stood again, suddenly serious. It's not that simple. If this gets out, my family will be humiliated. My company too. The media will eat it up. Emma glared.
That's not my problem.
Landon stepped closer. It is now. And with that, the reality began to sink in. Emma Carter wasn't just a struggling extra anymore. She was the accidental bride of a billionaire, and she had no idea how to escape. Emma woke up the next morning to the blinding light of a sunrise that felt almost insulting. The sheets smelled like vanilla and wealth, and the bed was so soft it felt like a trap. For a brief moment, she thought maybe it had all been a dream. But then she turned and saw him. Landon Rise, shirtless, asleep on the couch across the suite. Reality came crashing back with a vengeance. She scrambled out of bed, still wearing the satin robe the hotel had given her after the wedding. She needed her phone, her bag, her shoes. Anything that would let her bolt. She spotted her backpack near the entryway and lunged for it. But just as she reached it, the door clicked. Landon blocked the exit, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, dressed like a CO who casually owned the planet. Going somewhere. Mrs. Rise, don't call me that, she snapped, clutching her bag like a shield. I'm not your wife. Not really. This was all a mistake, and I'm leaving. He didn't flinch. You do realize if you walk out now, there are legal consequences, right? Emma narrowed her eyes. Legal consequences for being tricked into a marriage I didn't agree to? You said yes. In front of a priest. In front of 100 witnesses. I thought I was acting. Landon sipped his coffee like they were arguing over a dinner menu. And yet, you're legally my wife, even if it was unintentional. Emma exhaled sharply and paced the room, too angry to sit still. That's not possible, he said simply, not without drawing attention. If the media gets wind of this, it won't just be my family embarrassed. It'll be you. They'll dig up everything. Your job history, your family, your dad's medical bills. Trust me. They'll destroy you. She froze. Her stomach turned. So what? I'm stuck? No, Landon said, walking toward her. You have a choice. Emma eyed him suspiciously. What kind of choice? Stay married to me. For 1 month. Just one. Long enough for us to manage the narrative. We'll say we had a whirlwind romance. Eloped, you'll play the loving wife in public, and after 30 days, we quietly divorce. I'll even pay you for your time." She crossed her arms. "You're offering to rent me as your wife?" "I'm offering you $5 million. Emma's arms dropped. Landon went on, voice calm, businesslike. "You can use it however you want. Your dad's treatment, your siblings' education, your future. After that, you're free." Emma stared at him, her mind screaming while her body stood still. 5 million. That kind of money could erase every problem in her life. She could vanish from this disaster and start over completely. But the idea of pretending to be someone's wife, day after day, felt like selling her soul. "I don't sleep with employers," she muttered, her voice tight. Landon gave her a look, half amused, half insulted. "It's not that kind of arrangement. I'll keep my distance. You'll have your own room, your own space. I just need you to show up at events, smile for photos, and act like you don't hate me." She snorted. "That might be the hardest part." He smirked. "You'll manage." Emma fell onto the couch, overwhelmed. She thought of her dad's coughing fits, the pile of overdue bills, the way her siblings tried to hide their hunger. 5 million could fix all of that. "1 month," she said slowly. "No touching, no funny business." Landon held out his hand. "Deal." Emma didn't shake it. She just stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city skyline. "You better not make me regret this." Behind her, Landon said softly, "You're not the only one taking a risk, Emma." She didn't reply. She just watched the sun rise higher over Manhattan and whispered to herself, 1 month. Then I'd disappear. The first week felt like a movie set on an endless loop. Emma smiled at the right times, waved when expected, wore gowns that cost more than her dad's entire medical history, and pretended to be madly in love with a man she didn't even like. Most of the time, Landon played his part too, flawlessly. He wrapped his arm around her waist during charity galas, whispered convincing sweet nothings at exclusive luncheons, and never once stepped out of character. But when the cameras disappeared, so did the charm. They barely spoke unless necessary. Emma kept to her own wing of the penthouse, slept with one eye open, and guarded her heart like it was glass already cracked. Still, there were cracks in Landon, too. One afternoon, she caught him standing alone in the rooftop garden, staring into the pool. His jaw was tight, fists clenched at his sides. She didn't mean to spy, but something about the way he looked at the water, like it had hurt him, made her pause. "You okay?" she asked softly, her voice nearly lost in the wind. He startled, turning sharply, but softened when he saw it was her. "Yeah." "Just thinking." "You don't like swimming?" she ventured, eyeing the crystal-clear water. He looked away. "Not anymore." Emma didn't push. She just nodded and started to leave, but his voice stopped her. "I used to be a champion swimmer. Back before I went blind." She turned back slowly, surprised he offered something so personal. "There was an accident," he said, his voice distant. "A diving competition. I hit my head, lost my vision for 5 years. That pool reminds me of it." Emma stepped closer, cautiously.
But you had surgery?
He nodded. "A year ago. A risky procedure. I got lucky." "Not completely," she murmured. "You married a stranger." Landon let out a dry laugh, the first genuine one she'd heard from him. Touch. That night, something shifted. He joined her for dinner instead of eating alone in his study. They didn't talk much, but it wasn't uncomfortable. He even asked about her family, how her dad was doing, what her siblings liked. She told him about her brother's obsession with comic books and her sister's dream of becoming a baker. Landon listened quietly, his eyes less guarded. Then came the event that changed everything. One of Landon's cousins, a smug, broad-shouldered man named Bryce, invited them to a casual weekend retreat at the family lake house. Emma didn't want to go, but Landon insisted, said it was part of their deal. The lake house was stunning, nestled in the woods, with panoramic windows and private docks. But the lake itself sent visible shivers down Landon's spine. Bryce, ever the charming bully, noticed. Still afraid of a little water, Landon. He mocked, throwing an arm around Emma. "You sure you married a real woman? She looks like she could outswim you." Emma stepped away from Bryce, her stomach tightening at his tone. Landon didn't react, not outwardly, but she saw his jaw clench. Later that evening, as guests lounged by the bonfire, Bryce announced a midnight swimming dare. Nothing fancy, he grinned. Just a race to the buoy and back. Winner gets to ask anything from the loser. No refusals. The crowd cheered. Landon stood, fine. Emma grabbed his arm. "Don't." "I have to," he said quietly. "They'll never let this go." She looked into his eyes, saw the storm brewing behind them. "It's not worth it. It is to me." Midnight arrived. The dock was lit with lanterns, the lake shimmering like black glass. Landon stood at the edge, tense, silent. Emma turned to leave the crowd, heart pounding, but just as she stepped back, someone bumped her hard. Too hard. She lost balance and plunged into the icy water. Everything went dark. She flailed, panicked, the weight of her gown pulling her down. Somewhere above, she heard shouts. Then strong arms wrapped around her, pulling her upward. Landon. Landon. He swam with desperate strength, hauling her back to the dock. People rushed to help, but he cradled her himself, dripping wet and shaking. "Emma," he whispered, brushing wet hair from her face. "Are you okay?" She coughed violently, water pouring from her mouth. Her eyes blinked open. "You fell," he said hoarsely, "or were pushed." "I thought you were afraid of water," she rasped. "I still am," he whispered. "But I was more afraid of losing you." She stared at him, breathless, not from drowning, but from the realization that something between them had changed. Forever. The moment Landon pulled her from the lake, something shifted, not just between them, but inside her. Emma had never seen that look in anyone's eyes before. Raw fear followed by overwhelming relief, his arms wrapped around her like he wasn't just saving her from the water, but from the world. And when he carried her into the lake house, refusing to let anyone else touch her, she didn't fight it. She was too cold, too dazed, and too confused by the way her heart pounded for reasons that had nothing to do with drowning. He placed her gently on the couch near the fireplace and wrapped her in a thick blanket. Someone handed him a towel, but he ignored it, kneeling beside her with soaked hair plastered to his forehead. "You scared the hell out of me," he muttered, his voice trembling despite how hard he tried to steady it. Emma's lips trembled too, but mostly from shock. "I didn't mean to fall." "I know," he said softly. "Someone pushed you." She looked up, startled. "You think it was Bryce?" His jaw flexed. "I don't think—" I know. I saw the angle." "He nudged you, just enough." Emma's hands tightened around the blanket. "Why?" Landon's eyes darkened. "Because he's threatened by me, and by you." A beat of silence passed before she dared to ask, Why would he be threatened by me? Landon met her gaze, and for once, there was no sarcasm, no performance. Just quiet intensity. Because I care about you. The words sat between them like something fragile and electric. Emma swallowed hard and looked away, unsure what to do with the knot twisting in her chest. A few hours later, after the guests had retreated to their rooms and the house had gone still, Emma stood on the back porch, staring at the reflection of the moon on the lake. Her wet hair was now dry, but her mind was still soaked in what had just happened. Landon stepped outside behind her, hands in his pockets. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentler than usual. She nodded, not turning. "Yeah, just needed air." He came to stand beside her. "You were brave tonight." "I didn't do anything brave," she replied. "You're the one who jumped in." "I haven't gone into water that deep since the accident," he admitted. "But when I saw you fall, I didn't think. I just moved." She finally looked at him. His eyes were soft, searching hers. "Why do you care so much?" she asked. He was quiet for a long moment. "Then, because somewhere along the way you stopped being part of the deal. And I didn't even notice when it happened." Emma's breath caught. The wind whispered through the trees, but neither of them moved. "You said we'd play pretend for a month," she said, her voice a little unsteady. "But it doesn't feel like pretending anymore." "I know," he whispered. They stood in silence, the lake glistening like spilled ink beneath the stars. Then, almost hesitantly, Landon reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. They stayed like that until the night grew too cold. The next morning, things felt different, warmer, somehow. Landon met her in the kitchen with 2 mugs of coffee, one already fixed the way she liked it. They sat together at the table without awkwardness. When she laughed at something, he said it wasn't forced. And when he brushed a crumb off her cheek, she didn't flinch. Later, they packed up and returned to the city. But the distance that had once existed between them no longer did. In the car, he reached over and took her hand without a word. She let him. But not everyone was happy about the growing closeness. 2 days later, an envelope arrived at the penthouse. No return address. Emma opened it and found a note, scrawled in jagged handwriting. "You don't belong in his world. Stay out of it, or you'll regret it." She stared at the paper, her heart thudding. Landon walked in just as she dropped it on the coffee table. "What's that?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she met his eyes. The same ones that had searched hers by the lake, the same ones that had seen her not as a contract, but as something. Someone. One. "Trouble," she said quietly. "I think our fairy tale just got its villain." Emma didn't sleep that night. The note stayed on her nightstand, its cruel warning burned into her thoughts. "You don't belong in his world. Stay out of it, or you'll regret it." Over and over, she replayed it in her mind like a broken film reel. Whoever had sent it knew where she lived. They knew who she was. And they wanted her gone. She debated whether to tell Landon. Maybe it was nothing. Just a jealous relative lashing out, or someone from the lake house with too much time and too little class. But the chill that crept down her spine told her otherwise. The next morning, she found Landon in his home office, seated at his desk, sleeves rolled up, brows drawn together in deep concentration. When he saw her in the doorway, his expression softened. Couldn't sleep either. She stepped in, holding the note out in silence. Landon took it, reading quickly, then again, more slowly. His face darkened. "Where did this come from?" he asked, voice low. "It was delivered last night. No name. No return address." He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the polished wood floor. I'll have security check every camera in the building. This isn't just some prank." "Do you think it's Bryce?" Emma asked, already guessing the answer. Landon hesitated. "Maybe. He's petty enough. But this feels personal." Emma crossed her arms. "Maybe it's someone from her side." He looked up. "Elena," she said. "The woman you were supposed to marry." Landon stared at her, something unreadable in his expression. Then he walked past her, motioning for her to follow. "There's something I should show you." She followed him through the penthouse to a small sitting room she'd never entered before. He pulled out a drawer from an antique desk and retrieved a small box. Inside was a handkerchief, neatly folded and well worn. "Before I lost my sight," he said, "I was just a rich kid with no direction. Then one day at the airport, I got lost. I was blind by then, new to it, scared, angry. I was crying." Emma's eyes widened. "A girl found me," he continued, voice quiet. "She didn't pity me. She just sat beside me, gave me a sandwich, and told me everything would be okay. She gave me this." He handed her the handkerchief. She recognized it instantly. "That was you," he said, eyes locked on hers. "I didn't know it at first, but your voice, the way you comforted me that night after the pool, it all came back." Emma pressed a hand to her chest, stunned. "I remember that day. I missed my flight. You were sitting alone, and you looked so lost." "I never forgot," he said, stepping closer. "The embroidery said, E. Carter. My nanny read it to me. I never imagined I'd find you again. And when I did, I didn't know how to tell you." Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. "You should have said something. I didn't want you to think I married you out of obligation or nostalgia," he said. "But now, I'm glad it was you. No one else could have handled any of this." Emma looked down at the handkerchief, at the faded blue thread, and laughed through the tears. So much for coincidence. He reached for her hands, holding them gently. It wasn't coincidence. It was fate. But just as she started to lean in, a sharp knock echoed through the room. Landon tensed. One of his security staff stepped in, face grave. "Sir, you should see this." They followed him to the surveillance room, where a monitor showed footage from the building's front entrance. A woman stood there, elegant, poised, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Elena Fairchild," the guard said. "She's demanding to see Mr. Reyes." Emma's stomach dropped. Landon's face was unreadable. "Should I let her up?" the guard asked. Landon hesitated for only a second. "No, not yet." He turned to Emma, jaw clenched. "Get dressed. We're going to her." Emma blinked.
What? Why?
"Because if she's here, it means something bigger's coming. And I won't let her be the one to take this from us. Us, not me, not you, us." Emma didn't know what she was walking into, but for the first time since the wedding, she didn't feel alone. She nodded. "Let's go." The luxury cafe in Midtown was quiet that afternoon, the kind of place where polished floors whispered beneath Louboutin heels and conversations were held in hushed, elegant tones. Emma sat across from Elena Fairchild, the woman Landon was supposed to marry. She looked exactly how Emma imagined she would. Sleek hair, flawless skin, and a sharp gaze that held no trace of warmth. If Landon was the storm, Elena was ice, poised, unreadable, and dangerous in a way Emma couldn't quite explain. "I see he brought you," Elena said, her voice smooth as glass, eyes flicking toward Landon, seated beside Emma. "That's sweet." The happy couple making a public appearance. Landon's hand tightened around Emma's under the table. She didn't pull away. "Let's skip the pageantry," he said evenly. "What do you want, Elena?" She smiled, sipping her espresso like she had all the time in the world to set the record straight. Emma's eyebrows rose.
Is that what this is? A peer meeting?
"Oh, no, darling," Elena replied, setting her cup down with a delicate clink. "This is personal." She leaned forward. "You think this marriage is real? You think you're in love?" Her eyes darted to Landon. "I knew you when you couldn't even look in a mirror, Landon. You were mine." Emma's spine stiffened. "That's funny, considering you didn't even show up on your wedding day." "I had my reasons," Elena said coolly, "none of which involved some street actress playing my part." Landon stood. "That's enough." But Emma placed a hand on his arm. "No, let her talk." Elena tilted her head. "Of course you'd want to hear it. You probably think you won the lottery. A poor girl catapulted into a billionaire's world. You're living in a fairy tale, Emma. But all fairy tales have an ending. We don't belong in this one." Emma didn't flinch. "You're right. I didn't expect this. I didn't ask for it. But I'm here now, and believe it or not, I didn't come into Landon's life looking to take anything from you." "Oh, but you did," Elena hissed. "You took everything." Landon spoke up then, his voice low but firm. "No, Elena. You gave everything away. You chose to walk away from us. Long before the wedding, you were gone in every way that mattered." Her eyes glistened, and for the first time, her mask cracked. "You think I didn't see it? The way you looked for her when you still couldn't see her. The girl with the handkerchief. You talked about her in your sleep. You talked about her in your sleep. You were already in love with someone you didn't remember." Emma blinked, stunned. Landon swallowed hard. "You knew?" Elena nodded. "I didn't leave because I didn't love you. I left because I knew you didn't love me." Silence settled over the table like a fog. Then Elena stood, brushing non-existent dust from her blazer. "Enjoy your month, Emma. But be careful. This world isn't kind to women who forget their place." She walked away, her heels clicking like punctuation marks on a bitter farewell. Back at the penthouse, Emma sat by the window, watching the sun dip below the skyline. She didn't say much during the ride home. Landon had reached for her hand once, but she hadn't taken it. Now, he approached quietly. "I didn't know she was that bitter." "She's not just bitter," Emma murmured. "She's hurt." Landon sank into the seat beside her. "And you?" Emma looked at him, the sunset casting gold across his features. "I don't know. I thought I was just playing a part. But I'm not sure where the acting ends anymore." He leaned closer, then stopped acting. Her heart pounded. "Let this be real," he said gently. "Whatever this is between us, let it be real." Emma closed her eyes. "If I say yes, then I could get hurt. Worse than any anonymous threat. I'd never hurt you." "You already have," she whispered. He looked away, guilt written across his face. "Where?" "To the one place I always go when I don't know what to do." She hesitated, then slipped her fingers into his. Because despite everything, she wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. Landon drove them out of the city just before midnight, away from the glowing skyline and into the quiet outskirts, where streetlights grew sparse and the world felt hushed. Emma didn't ask where they were going. She just stared out the window, arms crossed over her chest, trying not to think about Elena's words or the sudden heaviness in her chest. Somewhere between pretending and surviving, she'd let herself believe this might all be real, that maybe Landon wasn't just a name on a magazine cover, that maybe he saw her the way no one else had. They arrived at a secluded cliffside overlooking the ocean. A small house stood at the edge, humble and dark, the opposite of everything Landon was used to. He parked the car and got out, walking silently ahead. Emma followed, the salty air whipping her hair around her face. Landon pulled out a key and opened the front door, revealing a simple one-room cabin with a worn couch, dusty shelves, and a large window framing the endless sea. "This was my grandfather's place," he said, flicking on a lamp. "No staff, no cameras, just this view and some silence. It's where I used to go when the noise got too loud." Emma stepped inside slowly. "It's peaceful." Landon walked over to the window, gazing out. "He built this himself after retiring. Taught me how to fish off the rocks out there. He was blind too, toward the end. Said it helped him see more clearly." She looked around the room. Faded photographs on the mantel, a stack of handwritten journals on the coffee table, and a blanket draped over the armchair like someone had only recently left it. "I haven't been back here since before the surgery," he continued. "I used to sit here and imagine what the ocean looked like. Now I can see it, and it still doesn't feel real." Emma joined him at the window. "I know what you mean." They stood in silence for a long moment, watching the waves crash in rhythmic defiance against the shore. It was the kind of silence that didn't demand explanation, that wrapped around them like a secret too sacred to speak. "Why did you bring me here?" she finally asked. "Because I'm tired of pretending," he said. "Not just with you. With everyone. My whole life has been about image, control, perfect timing. But with you, I never knew what would happen next. And for the first time, that felt like a relief." Emma's breath hitched. "I know I hurt you," Landon added, his voice quieter now, "by dragging you into this. By not telling you sooner, but I meant what I said. At the wedding, by the lake, after the cafe. I care about you, Emma. Not because you saved me once. Not because you played your part. Because somewhere between the lies and the contracts, you became real to me." She turned to him slowly.
"So, what happens now?"
He reached for her hand. "That's up to you." Emma looked down at their intertwined fingers. The wind howled softly outside. She thought about her dad, her siblings, the bills piling up back home. She thought about Bryce's sneer, Elena's venom, the note on her nightstand. Then she thought about Landon diving into the lake, about the way he looked at her when she laughed, about this place, quiet, imperfect, and honest. "I can't go back to pretending," she whispered. "Then don't," he replied. "Stay." Her eyes met his. "What if I fall?" "Then I'll catch you." She didn't answer. She just leaned into him, resting her head against his chest, letting the steady rhythm of his heartbeat lull her fears just for a moment. They spent the night in the cabin. No lavish hotel. No velvet sheets. Just two people, side by side, trying to figure out what was real. Landon fell asleep on the couch with her curled into his side, his hand resting gently over hers. But when the sun rose the next morning, Emma was gone. No note, no sound. Just an empty space beside him, and the scent of her shampoo lingering on the pillow. Landon's heart dropped. Back in the city, Emma boarded a bus under a different name, a duffel bag at her feet and tears stinging her eyes. She told herself it was the right thing to do. That love wasn't enough when you were constantly looking over your shoulder. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she had to leave before it hurt any more than it already did. Emma hadn't planned on returning to Chicago, but when the bus pulled into the city's weather-worn terminal, something inside her sighed in recognition. The air smelled of asphalt and rain. Horns blared in the distance. She slipped on her hoodie, pulled her duffel closer, and walked the familiar streets back to the cramped apartment she shared with her family. Everything was the same. Her dad's wheezing laugh echoing from the couch, the sound of her younger brother arguing with her sister over homework, the scent of overcooked rice lingering in the kitchen. Everything, except her. She had changed. She'd been someone's wife. She'd stood at the edge of love and run from it. Her sister Jennifer practically tackled her at the door.
Emma, you're alive.
Emma forced a smile. Barely. You just disappeared, Landon called. A lot. Even sent some guy to check if you were here. We didn't say anything, like you asked. But, Emma, what are you doing? He's loaded, and he clearly loves you. Emma dropped her bag and sat on the edge of the old couch. I don't belong in his world, Jen. Jennifer crossed her arms. You keep saying that like it's a fact, but maybe you just don't think you're worth it. Emma didn't answer. She was too busy staring at the old crack in the ceiling, the same one she'd counted stars in as a child. Her life had always been small, manageable, predictable. That's what made it safe. Landon Rise was the opposite of safe. He was fast cars, media headlines, and a future too big to hold on to. The next morning, she got a call from Sylvia, an old friend from her acting days. Hey, there's this gig. Pays big, quick turnaround. You in? Emma hesitated. What kind of gig? You play a vendor in the middle of a turf fight, low-budget indie stuff. They specifically asked for you. That was strange. Still, her family needed the money, and a job was a job. Emma said yes. When she arrived on set, it wasn't what she expected. No cameras, no script. Just a warehouse and a group of tough-looking men standing around like they were waiting for something. Or someone. Before she could turn and leave, a man stepped forward and asked, "Are you Emma Carter?" She blinked. Yeah. Without warning, two of them grabbed her. Hey! Let go of me! She screamed, kicking and flailing. Sylvia! She saw her friend standing nearby, pretending to panic. But the smirk on Sylvia's face betrayed her.
Sorry, babe,
Sylvia called out. You always had the better love story. Emma was shoved into a black SUV. Her heart raced, panic blurring her thoughts. She screamed until her throat hurt, kicked at the windows, and pounded on the locked doors. The driver said nothing. The man seated across from her wore dark sunglasses and a sharp navy suit. He didn't speak until the car was speeding down the highway. I've been looking for you, he said. Emma blinked, stunned. Landon? He took off the glasses. It was him. You kidnapped me? She shouted. You ran, he replied, voice cold. What did you expect me to do? Sit and wait? You can't just throw me into a car and... Yes, I can, he said sharply. Because I love you, and you left me without a word. Do you have any idea what that did to me? Emma glared at him. I was trying to protect you. You don't get to decide what I need, he snapped. You're my wife. Emma's eyes burned. Not anymore. That marriage wasn't even real. His gaze didn't waver. It was real to me. And now, we're going on our honeymoon. I don't care if I had to drag you there myself. You're insane, she whispered. Maybe, Landon said, shrugging. But I'm also done letting you run. She fell silent, her heart torn between fury and something deeper. Something dangerously close to longing. He stared at her for a long moment. You want me to stop the car? Emma looked at him, jaw clenched. Then she slowly leaned back in her seat. No, she whispered. but you better not make me regret this." Landon's lips curved into a familiar half-smile. "I won't." And as the city faded behind them, Emma closed her eyes, unsure whether she was escaping something or finally coming home. The private jet touched down in Maui just before dusk, painting the sky in hues of orange and lavender. Emma hadn't spoken much since Landon's dramatic retrieval, still processing the whirlwind that had brought her back to him. A part of her resented the way he had taken control, whisking her away like she was some runaway bride in a soap opera. But another part, one she refused to admit out loud, was quietly relieved. Relieved that he'd come for her, that he hadn't just let her go. The moment they stepped out onto the tarmac, a driver was already waiting. "Welcome back, Mr. and Mrs. Rise," he said with a polite bow. Emma stiffened at the title, but Landon simply placed a hand on the small of her back and led her to the car without a word. Their vacation home wasn't the sprawling beachfront estate she'd imagined. Instead, it was a quieter, more secluded house tucked into the cliffs overlooking the ocean. As soon as she stepped inside, Emma could feel the difference. It wasn't the kind of place designed to impress investors or entertain board members. It felt lived in, peaceful, safe. Still, she kept her distance. That first night, Landon offered her the master suite. "You can have the whole room to yourself," he said, tossing a towel over his shoulder after his shower. "I'll take the guest house." Emma stared at him, brow furrowed. "Why are you being so chivalrous?" He gave a tired smile. "Because I scared you. I know I did. And I want to fix that." She didn't respond, only nodded once and shut the door softly behind her. But she didn't sleep much. Her mind was a mess of emotion, resentment, guilt, longing, and none of it had a clear path forward. The next morning, she woke to the smell of pancakes. She walked downstairs in her robe to find Landon, hair still tousled, wearing a plain t-shirt and barefoot in the kitchen. He was flipping pancakes like a man who had never once needed to impress anyone. "You cook?" she asked, surprised. He looked over and smirked. "Only when I'm trying to win someone back." Emma raised an eyebrow.
Bribery by breakfast.
"Hey, it worked on my college roommate. Figured it's worth a shot." She took a seat at the counter, trying not to smile. The pancakes were perfect, fluffy and golden. As she took her first bite, Landon leaned against the opposite counter, sipping his coffee. "You disappeared," he said quietly. She set her fork down. "I had to." "Why?" "Because loving you terrified me," she confessed. "Because for the first time in my life, I wanted something I didn't earn. And that scared me more than any threat." Landon set his mug down and crossed to her side. "Emma, I don't care where you came from, or how we started. I care about where we go from here." She looked up at him, and something inside her cracked. "Then stop making decisions for me. If this is going to be real, I need to feel like I'm part of it, not just dragged along for the ride." Landon nodded slowly. "Fair enough." They spent the rest of the week in a strange rhythm, half strangers, half something more. They took walks along the beach, played old video games in the den, watched movies at night with popcorn and arguments over plot holes. Emma found herself laughing more than she expected, and slowly she let her guard down. One afternoon, while exploring the cliffs near the house, she slipped on a rock and scraped a knee. Landon rushed to her side, panic etched across his face. "I'm fine," she said, trying to wave him off. But he was already kneeling, inspecting the cut with the tenderness of someone who'd almost lost her once and wasn't willing to take the risk again. "You're not allowed to get hurt," he muttered. "Not anymore." She stared at him, heart pounding. "Then don't hurt me either." Landon looked up, his expression open and vulnerable. "Never again." That night, for the first time, Emma didn't retreat to the master's suite. Instead, she curled up beside him on the couch, her head on his chest, his arm around her. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Because for the first time since their accidental wedding, neither of them was pretending. When they returned to New York a week later, the city felt different, quieter somehow, like it was waiting for them to decide what came next. Emma no longer walked 3 steps behind Landon or flinched when someone called her Mrs. Rise. She had stopped counting the days until the 30-day arrangement ended, because somewhere in between shared pancakes, stolen glances, and unspoken promises, she'd stopped thinking of herself as temporary. But reality, as always, was waiting to catch up. The first sign came from his mother. "You're glowing, dear," Mrs. Rise said with a knowing smile when they joined the family for dinner. "Marriage suits you." Emma tried to respond politely, but Landon stepped in first. "That's because she's the best thing that ever happened to me." His father raised an eyebrow. "Even better than that $10 billion merger you closed last quarter." Emma laughed nervously, cheeks flushed. They all laughed, but later that night, when they were alone in their penthouse, Landon turned to her, serious. "They think we're permanent now," he said. "We haven't told them anything." Emma sat on the edge of the bed, tugging at the hem of her shirt. "Do you want to?" Landon ran a hand through his hair, sighing. "Not really, because I don't want this to end." Her eyes found his. "Then don't let it." He crossed the room and knelt in front of her. "Emma, this started as an accident. A mess. A mistake. But somehow, you became the only thing that feels right." Her voice shook. "I was so sure I'd run once the money came in. That I'd disappear the second you let me go. But now, I don't want to leave." Landon reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Emma's breath caught. "It's not the one from our wedding," he said. "That ring was meant for someone else. This one's just for you." He opened it. Inside was a simple gold band, delicate, understated. Nothing like the flashy pieces she'd seen on Society Wives. It was exactly her. "I already married you once by mistake," he said with a grin. "Now I want to do it on purpose." Emma laughed through her tears, nodding before he even asked. "Yes, yes. 1,000 times, yes." The second wedding was small. Just family and a few close friends. No headlines. No billion-dollar venue. Just a little garden chapel and enough flowers to fill the air with the scent of something new blooming. This time, she wore a dress she chose herself. Landon didn't wear a tux, just a navy blue suit and the same warm smile that made her knees weak. When the priest said, "You may now kiss the bride," Emma didn't hesitate. Because now she wanted the kiss. She kissed him like it was the first time and the last time, and somewhere in between, she forgot the months of fear, the lies, the staged romance. There was only truth now, and it tasted like forever. Months later, they returned to her childhood neighborhood in Chicago. Emma walked Landon through the narrow hallways of the apartment where she'd grown up. Her dad shook his hand with surprising warmth. Her sister cried. Even Jennifer, the one who teased her the most, was speechless when Landon offered to help fund her culinary school tuition. "You're really staying?" her father asked, eyes misty. Emma smiled and nodded. "I'm not running anymore." That night, she and Landon lay on the squeaky old mattress in her childhood room, listening to the city buzz outside the cracked window. "You know," he murmured, tracing circles on her arm, "I used to think I needed someone who came from my world." She turned toward him, her eyes soft. "And now?" He kissed her shoulder. She smiled into the darkness. We built something messy, complicated, maybe even ridiculous. But it's ours, Landon said, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. As they drifted to sleep, hand in hand beneath the patchwork quilt her grandmother had sewn, Emma realized something beautiful. She hadn't just fallen into a life she never expected. She'd fallen into love, real, messy, unpredictable love, the kind that no script could have written better. Life lesson. Emma and Landon's story reminds us that life rarely unfolds the way we expect it to. Sometimes the most unexpected detours lead us to the people and places we were always meant to find. What began as a mistaken identity and a marriage built on convenience transformed into a deep, genuine love. Because two people chose to be honest, to fight through the fear, and to stop pretending. The most powerful lesson here: love doesn't need perfect beginnings. It grows in the messy, between spaces, when we let go of our pride, open our hearts, and choose someone even when it's hard. Emma didn't believe she was worthy of a life beyond survival. Landon didn't think anyone could love the parts of him he kept hidden, but in each other, they found strength, healing, and a future they never dared to imagine. This story also shows that true connection isn't about status, wealth, or flawless appearances. It's about seeing someone, really seeing them, and still choosing them over and over again, even after the curtain falls, even when the crowd is gone. So if you're feeling lost, unsure, or like the life you want is out of reach, remember, it's never too late to rewrite your story. You don't need to fit the mold. You just need to take one brave step forward. Did you enjoy Emma and Landon's journey? Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in comments. And if you want more stories filled with heart, drama, and unforgettable characters, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a chapter. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and never stop believing in second chances.